My 82-year-old father actually married a 28-year-old woman to be my stepmom. Nestled in the heart of the Italian countryside, a small village lay sprawled across rolling hills, its charm captured in the golden hues of the wheat fields and the fragrant lavender that bordered cobblestone pathways. The village, with its stone houses and red-tiled roofs, seemed frozen in time. A narrow river meandered through the land, its soft gurgling a constant melody for the villagers who lived their quiet lives, tending to vineyards and olive groves. The village's centerpiece was the ancient bell tower, its chimes marking the hours with a rhythm that echoed through generations. Children played under the shade of chestnut trees. An elderly couple sat on weathered benches in the square, exchanging stories that seemed as old as the buildings themselves. Life in the village was tranquil, each day unfolding like a well-worn ritual. Among the village's most respected figures was Lorenzo, an 82-year-old retired blacksmith. His hands, calloused from decades of forging tools and crafting ironwork, told the story of a life built on hard work and resilience. Lorenzo was a widower, having lost his wife Anna nearly a decade earlier. Despite his advanced age, he still carried an air of vitality, his sharp wit and warm demeanor making him beloved by all. To many, he was a living embodiment of the village's spirit, steady, enduring, and wise. Lorenzo had one son, Matteo, a man in his early 40s who had left the village years ago in search of opportunity in the bustling city. Matteo's time in the city had shaped him into a practical, somewhat reserved man, his views often clashing with the more traditional ways of the village. When Anna passed away, Matteo returned to the village to care for his aging father and the family home. Though their bond was strong, Matteo often found himself questioning his father's choices, especially when they clashed with his pragmatic worldview. Life in the village carried on peacefully until one afternoon when Lorenzo gathered a few close friends and Matteo in the family courtyard. Seated in his favorite wooden chair under the sprawling branches of an ancient fig tree, Lorenzo announced a decision that sent ripples through the close-knit community. He was going to remarry. His chosen bride was Elena, a 27-year-old woman from a neighboring region. The revelation left Matteo stunned. Elena's name was unfamiliar to him, and the thought of his father, at such an advanced age, marrying a much younger woman seemed outlandish. The announcement quickly spread through the village like wildfire. The marketplace buzzed with murmurs and speculations. Was it true? Who was this woman? What were her intentions? Matteo's initial reaction was one of disbelief, quickly followed by concern. He approached his father that evening, his voice tinged with frustration. "Father, what are you thinking? She's young enough to be your granddaughter. Do you even know her well?" Lorenzo, undeterred, responded with calm conviction. "Elena is a kind woman, Matteo. She brings light and warmth into my life, something I haven't felt in years. You'll see it for yourself once you meet her." Matteo couldn't shake his doubts. In his mind, Elena's youth and beauty were red flags. Why would someone like her choose an elderly man in a quiet village over the opportunities of a bustling town? Was it love, or was there something more calculated behind her charm? The villagers, too, were divided in their opinions. Some admired Lorenzo's courage, viewing his decision as a pursuit of happiness in his twilight years. Others, however, whispered behind their hands, skeptical of Elena's motives. They questioned whether she was drawn to Lorenzo's modest wealth, a house, a vineyard, and a lifetime of carefully saved earnings. The tension between father and son grew as the day of Elena's arrival approached. Matteo, torn between his loyalty to his father and his gnawing doubts, resolved to observe the situation closely. As the village braced for the arrival of the mysterious young bride, the tranquil rhythm of life began to shift, and the seeds of conflict were quietly sown beneath the picturesque facade of the countryside. Little did Matteo know, this decision would challenge not only his perception of love and trust, but also the very fabric of their familial bond. The once peaceful village, with its sunlit fields and melodic river, was about to become the stage for a tale of suspicion, sacrifice, and ultimately reconciliation. From the moment Elena stepped into their lives, Matteo couldn't shake the unease that settled in his chest. Her arrival at the village was like a ripple disturbing the still waters of a pond. She was undeniably beautiful, with her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders and eyes that seemed to gleam with an enigmatic spark. Her graceful demeanor and warm smiles quickly won over many of the villagers. Yet, for Matteo, every kind word, every charming gesture felt calculated, as though she were weaving an invisible web around his father. Matteo's skepticism gnawed at him, particularly during quiet moments in the family home. He often caught himself watching Elena when she wasn't aware, noting every detail. The way her hands moved deftly while preparing meals, the soft hum of a song she carried from her homeland, the curious glances she cast at the family heirlooms. What was she thinking? Matteo wondered. Was she assessing the value of the home, calculating her gains once Lorenzo passed? The more Matteo observed, the more his mind spiraled with doubt. He began to notice what he considered odd behaviors. Elena made frequent trips to the village market, often returning with goods that seemed unnecessary, extra spices, herbs, and even fine fabrics that felt out of place in their modest home. Matteo tried to dismiss these as harmless indulgences, but his suspicions deepened when he saw her speaking in hushed tones with strangers at the edge of the village. The conversations were brief, and the people unfamiliar. When he approached her about it, she dismissed his concern with a light laugh. "Just asking for directions," she'd said, her smile as effortless as the breeze. But the most alarming moment came one evening when Matteo caught sight of Elena in the kitchen, adding a white powder to the stew simmering on the stove. He stood frozen in the doorway, watching as she stirred the pot with deliberate precision. The image burned into his mind, fueling his growing paranoia. What was she doing? Was it poison? Matteo's pulse quickened, and he clenched his fists at his sides, deciding that he could no longer stand by silently. The opportunity to confront Elena came later that evening as the three of them sat at the dinner table. Lorenzo was in high spirits, complimenting Elena on the meal, while Matteo barely touched his plate, his eyes darting between them. Finally, he could bear it no longer. "Why don't you tell us what's really in the food, Elena?" Matteo's voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere like a blade. Lorenzo looked up in confusion, his fork pausing midair. Elena raised her eyebrows, her expression calm but curious. "I'm not sure what you mean, Matteo." Matteo leaned forward, his tone sharper now. "I saw you in the kitchen earlier. You were adding something to the stew, a white powder. What was it?" Elena's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, Matteo thought he saw a flicker of irritation in her otherwise composed demeanor. She set her utensils down and looked him squarely in the eye. "It was a herbal supplement, Matteo," she said evenly. "Something I brought from my region to help with arthritis. Your father mentioned his joints have been troubling him." Matteo scoffed, his disbelief evident. "A supplement? That's convenient. How do we know it's not something else? You expect us to take your word for it?" Lorenzo, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Matteo, that's enough. I trust Elena. If she says it's for my health, then it is." "Trust?" Matteo snapped, turning to his father. "How can you trust someone we barely know? She shows up here, young and charming, and suddenly we're supposed to believe she's here out of love. What if she's just here to take advantage of you?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Elena's calm exterior showed its first crack as her gaze hardened. "I came here because I care about your father," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've done nothing to harm him or this family. If my presence is such a burden to you, Matteo, perhaps you should ask yourself why you're so determined to think the worst of me." Lorenzo's tone grew stern. "Matteo, this isn't just about you. It's about my life, my happiness. Elena has brought me peace and companionship. If you can't accept that, then perhaps you need to reflect on your own insecurities." The words stung Matteo, but he couldn't let go of his suspicions. He stormed out of the room, leaving his half-eaten dinner behind. The conversation played over in his mind as he paced the courtyard under the moonlight. He couldn't trust Elena. Her charm was too perfect, her actions too calculated. He resolved to keep a closer watch on her, determined to find proof of her deceit. In the following days, Matteo's unease only grew. He continued to shadow Elena, noting every interaction and every errand. Her frequent trips to the market, her brief conversations with unfamiliar faces, and her serene composure around Lorenzo. All of it seemed too orchestrated. Even her explanation about the white powder nagged at him. What if it was a medicine? What if she was slowly poisoning his father under the guise of care? The tension in the household became palpable. Lorenzo, though unaware of Matteo's growing obsession, sensed the strain. Elena, on the other hand, remained polite but distant, her movements measured as if she were navigating a minefield. Matteo, consumed by his doubts, couldn't see the toll his behavior was taking on those around him. What Matteo didn't realize was that his battle with Elena was not just about protecting his father. It was also a reflection of his own fears. Having returned to the village after years away, Matteo struggled to reconcile his role as a caretaker with the life he had left behind. Elena's presence, rather than being the threat he imagined, was exposing wounds he hadn't known were there. Yet Matteo's suspicions blinded him to any alternative interpretation of Elena's actions. In his mind, she remained an enigma, a puzzle he was determined to solve, even if it meant risking the fragile peace of their family. The days following Matteo's confrontation with Elena were fraught with tension. The once warm and lively atmosphere of the house had grown heavy, its rooms filled with unspoken accusations and lingering distrust. Lorenzo, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued to bask in Elena's care and companionship, while Matteo's suspicion burned like a smoldering fire. He could no longer sit idly by, convinced that Elena's presence was a ticking time bomb that would shatter his family. Late one evening, Matteo sat alone in his room, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. He replayed the scene of Elena adding the white powder to the stew, her conversations with strangers at the market, and her seamless charm that had won over his father. Every detail seemed to confirm his fears, but another voice in his mind whispered doubt. What if he was wrong? What if Elena truly cared for Lorenzo? But Matteo couldn't take the risk. The stakes were too high. He had already lost his mother years ago. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his father to deceit. Resolving to protect Lorenzo at all costs, Matteo made a drastic decision. He would do whatever it took to force Elena to leave. The next morning, Matteo began the grim task of selling off valuable possessions to raise the money he thought would secure Elena's departure. He started with small items. An antique clock that had adorned the living room for decades, a set of silverware passed down through generations, and even his mother's delicate lace curtains. Each transaction felt like a betrayal of his family's legacy, yet Matteo convinced himself it was for the greater good. As he carried out the sales, Matteo's inner turmoil grew. Memories of his childhood flashed before him. His father working tirelessly at the forge, his mother preparing meals in their modest kitchen, and the laughter that used to echo through the house. Now, piece by piece, he was dismantling those memories, all in the name of protecting what was left of their family. The villagers, who had long whispered about Lorenzo's marriage plans, noticed Matteo's actions and began to talk. Why is Matteo selling everything? They wondered aloud. The questions only added to Matteo's guilt, but he pressed on. In his mind, the end justified the means. When Matteo finally confronted Elena with the money, it was late afternoon. The golden sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the modest kitchen where Elena was preparing tea. She turned to face him as he entered, her expression calm but curious. Elena, Matteo began, his voice firm but strained. He placed a pouch of coins and folded bills on the table between them. Take this and leave. Elena's eyes flicked to the pouch, then back to Matteo's face. Her expression remained unreadable as she asked, Leave? What are you talking about? I know what you're doing, Matteo said, his tone sharper now. You've charmed my father, but I see through you. I won't let you take advantage of him. Take this money and go, before you cause more harm. Elena stared at him for a long moment, her silence unsettling. Then, to Matteo's surprise, she gave a faint, weary smile. If that's what you want, Matteo, she said quietly, I'll leave, but you should know, I never wanted anything from your father except his happiness. Her words caught Matteo off guard, but he quickly masked his uncertainty with a curt nod. Good, the sooner you're gone, the better. Elena's departure was swift and silent. The next morning, she packed her belongings into a small bag and left without ceremony. Lorenzo, who had spent the evening in the garden, was devastated when he discovered her absence. Where's Elena? He asked Matteo, his voice tinged with worry. Why didn't she say goodbye? Matteo avoided his father's gaze, his stomach twisting with guilt. She decided to leave, father, he said flatly. She must have realized this wasn't a place for her. Lorenzo's face fell, the lines of age deepening as he sank into his chair. I don't understand, he murmured. She was so happy here. I thought she cared for me. Matteo didn't respond, unable to meet the pain in his father's eyes. Instead, he retreated to his room, where he sat in the dark, grappling with the weight of his actions. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had protected his father from a potential threat. But the hollowness in the house, the absence of Elena's laughter, the stillness that lingered in her wake, made him question whether he had truly succeeded or simply torn apart something precious. In the days that followed, the house grew quieter. Lorenzo became withdrawn, his usual vitality dimmed by an unshakable sadness. The villagers, too, noticed the change, but no one dared to question Matteo directly. For all their whispers and speculations, they couldn't unravel the truth behind Elena's sudden departure. As Matteo watched his father shuffle through the empty halls, his heart ached with a guilt he couldn't admit. He had rid the house of Elena, but at what cost? The peace he had hoped to restore now felt like a fragile facade, and Matteo couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. In the silence of the house, Matteo resolved to focus on his father's well-being, burying his doubts deep within. Yet a part of him couldn't help but wonder if, in his effort to protect Lorenzo, he had only succeeded in pushing away someone who truly cared. The weeks after Elena's departure were a blur of silence and sorrow in Lorenzo's home. The once lively atmosphere, filled with her humming and Lorenzo's hearty laughter, had been replaced by an oppressive stillness. Lorenzo spent much of his time sitting quietly in the garden, gazing at the flowers he and Elena had tended together. Matteo noticed how his father's shoulders seemed to stoop lower with each passing day, his steps growing slower and less steady. One crisp morning, as Matteo prepared coffee in the kitchen, he heard a sudden crash from the garden. Rushing outside, he found Lorenzo collapsed on the stone path, clutching his chest, his face pale and glistening with sweat. Father, Matteo shouted, his voice laced with panic as he knelt beside Lorenzo. Stay with me, I'll get help. With the assistance of neighbors, Matteo managed to rush Lorenzo to the nearest hospital, a modest facility on the outskirts of the town. The doctor, an older man with a grave expression, examined Lorenzo and delivered grim news. Your father has suffered a heart attack, the doctor said. His condition is critical, and he'll need surgery to survive. But the procedure is expensive, far beyond what this clinic can provide without immediate payment. Matteo's heart sank. He thought of the family heirlooms and possessions he had sold to drive Elena away. There was little left of their wealth, and the modest earnings from the vineyard would barely cover the cost of a hospital bed, let alone life-saving surgery. Isn't there anything you can do? Matteo pleaded, desperation heavy in his voice. The doctor sighed. We can stabilize him for now, but if we don't act soon, his chances will diminish. That night, Matteo sat in the dimly lit hallway of the hospital, his head buried in his hands. Guilt weighed heavily on him. He had sold away their legacy and driven away Elena, all in the name of protecting his father, only to find himself powerless when his father truly needed him. The irony was suffocating. As he sat lost in thought, a soft but firm voice interrupted the quiet. Matteo, he looked up startled. Standing before him, wearing a simple coat and carrying a small satchel, was Elena. For a moment, Matteo could only stare, his emotions a storm of shock, guilt, and, to his own surprise, relief. What are you doing here? Matteo finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Haven't you caused enough damage? Elena's gaze didn't waver. I heard about Lorenzo. I came to help. Help! Matteo's laugh was bitter. The last time you helped, you left him heartbroken. Elena stepped closer, her tone measured but firm. You don't know the whole story, Matteo. You've been so busy doubting me that you never stopped to ask why I was here in the first place. Matteo crossed his arms, his defenses still up. Then enlighten me. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes softening as she began to explain. Your father told me about his chest pains months ago, but he refused to see a doctor. He was stubborn, he didn't want to worry you. I brought herbal supplements to ease his discomfort, but I knew they weren't enough. That's why I started meeting with doctors in the neighboring towns. I wanted to find someone who could help when the time came. Matteo frowned, his mind racing to reconcile her words with his earlier suspicions. And the money. The people you met with. I used the money you gave me to make a deposit for his surgery, Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. The strangers you saw me talking to? They were doctors, hospital administrators, people who could help us prepare for a situation like this. For a moment, Matteo was speechless. The image he had constructed of Elena, a cunning opportunist seeking to exploit his father, crumbled under the weight of her explanation. He had misjudged her at every turn, blinded by his own fears and insecurities. Why didn't you tell me? Matteo finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's lips curled into a faint, sad smile. Would you have believed me? From the moment I arrived, you saw me as a threat. I thought that by leaving, I could give you both peace. But when I heard Lorenzo was sick, I knew I couldn't stay away. Together, Matteo and Elena met with the doctor the next morning. Elena presented the deposit she had made, and Matteo offered what little funds he had left. The doctor, moved by their determination, agreed to perform the surgery immediately, with the remaining balance to be settled later. As Lorenzo was wheeled into the operating room, Matteo sat beside Elena in the waiting area. For the first time, he allowed himself to see her for who she truly was, not an outsider, but someone who genuinely cared for his father. I was wrong about you, Matteo admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I let my fears cloud my judgment, and I treated you unfairly. I'm sorry, Elena. Elena looked at him, her expression soft but resolute. I understand, Matteo. You are protecting your family. I only hope that now, you'll trust me enough to see that I'm trying to protect it too. Matteo nodded, his heart heavy with regret, but lighter with newfound understanding. Thank you for coming back. For everything. The surgery was a success. When Lorenzo awoke, weak but alive, he found Matteo and Elena sitting by his bedside. The sight of them together brought tears to his eyes. You're here, Lorenzo said hoarsely, looking at Elena. I thought you left for good. I couldn't stay away, Elena replied gently, taking his hand. You mean too much to me. As Lorenzo rested, Matteo stepped outside the room with Elena. He turned to her, his gaze steady. You saved him, and you saved me too, in a way. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Elena smiled faintly. You don't need to. Just take care of him. That's all I've ever wanted. For the first time in weeks, Matteo felt a sense of peace. He had been wrong to doubt Elena, and though he couldn't undo his mistakes, he could begin to make amends. Together, he and Elena would help Lorenzo recover, not as adversaries, but as a family united by love and sacrifice. Lorenzo's recovery was slow but steady. With each passing day, strength returned to his frail body. Under the care of Matteo and Elena, he regained his vitality, though his movements were more measured and his words tinged with gratitude for the second chance at life. The house, once steeped in tension and silence, began to feel alive again. Matteo found himself observing Elena with fresh eyes, her dedication and warmth now unmistakable. She wasn't the enemy he had imagined. She was the glue that held their fractured family together. One quiet afternoon, as Lorenzo rested in the garden, Matteo approached Elena, who was folding linens on the patio. The weight of his guilt had grown too heavy to bear. Elena, he began hesitantly, his hands fumbling at his sides. I need to say something. She looked up, her expression calm but curious. What is it, Matteo? He took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat. I was wrong about you. From the moment you arrived, I doubted your intentions. I let my fears and my pride blind me to who you truly are. I see now how much you've done for my father, for our family, and I'm so sorry for everything. For a moment, Elena said nothing, her gaze searching his face. Then, to Matteo's surprise, she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that seemed to ease the tension in the air. I forgave you a long time ago, Matteo, she said gently. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you see the truth now, and that we can move forward together. Her words lifted a burden from Matteo's shoulders. He nodded, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. Thank you. I'll do better from now on, for my father, and for you. With Lorenzo's health improving, he and Elena decided to proceed with their wedding. But this time, it wasn't just about their union. It was about celebrating the strength of their family and the bonds that had been tested but ultimately held firm. The news spread quickly through the village, and preparations began in earnest. The small community, once buzzing with rumors and doubts, now rallied around Lorenzo and Elena with genuine excitement. The day of the wedding arrived, bathed in the golden light of an early summer morning. The village square was transformed into a vibrant scene of joy and celebration. Long tables were adorned with wildflowers and white linens, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted lamb filled the air. Musicians tuned their instruments, their lively melodies echoing through the cobblestone streets. Elena emerged from the family home, wearing a simple yet elegant gown of ivory lace that seemed to catch the sunlight. Her hair was adorned with delicate flowers, and her radiant smile captured the hearts of all who saw her. Beside her stood Lorenzo, his figure slightly stooped, but his face alight with pride and happiness. Matteo walked ahead of them, carrying a ceremonial staff that symbolized the unity of their family. As they reached the village square, the elder of the community stepped forward to perform the ceremony. The vows were spoken amidst the gentle rustling of the breeze, the words carrying a deep sense of love and commitment. When the elder declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into cheers, the sound filling the air with unrestrained joy. The celebration continued late into the evening. Villagers danced to the music of fiddles and accordions, their laughter and cheer a testament to the unity that had been restored. Matteo, watching from the edge of the square, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His father's happiness was unmistakable, and for the first time, he felt no resentment, only gratitude. As the night wore on, Matteo found Elena sitting by the edge of the square, a faint smile on her lips as she watched the festivities. He approached her, his footsteps soft against the cobblestones. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, his tone lighter than it had been in months. Elena glanced at him, her smile widening. "It's beautiful," she said. Everything turned out exactly as it should. Matteo sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the crowd. "You made this possible," he said after a moment. "Not just the wedding, but everything. My father's recovery, this celebration, our family. I don't think I've ever said it, but thank you." Elena looked at him, her eyes warm. "We both fought for this, Matteo. And now, we can finally enjoy it." The night ended with the family gathered around the fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. Lorenzo sat between Matteo and Elena, his hand resting lightly on hers, his expression one of pure contentment. Matteo felt a deep sense of belonging. The fractures of the past healed in the glow of their shared love and unity. As the stars spread across the night sky, Matteo realized something profound. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about trust, forgiveness, and the willingness to stand together through even the hardest of trials. And in that moment, beneath the endless expanse of stars, he knew they had found something far more enduring than mere peace. They had found each other. The story of suspicion and reconciliation had come full circle, ending not in division, but in harmony. The once quiet home was now filled with laughter and warmth again, the bonds of love stronger than ever. In the heart of the village, their family had truly become whole.